As we saw in part one, the booming palm oil industry in Malaysia and Indonesia is one of the most emotive issues in the sustainable development debate today. But lurking on the horizon is another that in the long term may very well have much more impact on people's quality of life in the future: tourism. Global travel and tourism is now believed to be the world's biggest industry, accounting for nearly $6 trillion of economic activity each year. That's about 10% of global gross domestic product. Trade shows like the huge World Travel Market held annually in London are evidence of just how big the pie is and the intense competition between nations to get their slice of it. For many emerging nations, tourism is a vital sector fueling growth.
Tourism is actually, from an economic perspective, the economy is very, very good because you are not using much foreign reserves in order to bring in foreign reserves. So economically, it is very attractive.
Vietnam is a latecomer to the industry. It's seen the boom in neighbouring Thailand, where tourism makes a larger contribution to the economy than in any other Asian nation.
The tourism is considered by the government one of the key sectors in the national economy. And so far recently, especially in the past 10 years, the tourism has developed a lot.
Tourism is a very important industry. It's one of the sectors that contributing to about 13% of the economy GDP to the country. Economy employment actually creating around 4.8 million jobs, which is a lot.
It's in central Vietnam on the beaches around Da Nang, where once American servicemen went to relax during the Vietnam War, that the pace of development is at its most striking. It's where Neong Khan lives. The son of a local rickshaw driver, he works at the Nam Hai Hotel, earning a wage that was way beyond his father's dreams. Khan has worked all over the country and moved back home to join the Nam Hai.
I'm very surprised when I'm back here on the end of 2006. There's a lot of property, very big property in Hoi An.
Long stretches of the beach are enjoying a building boom as five-star hotels and celebrity golf courses scrabble for a piece of the action. Despite the economic uncertainties of the age, developers and the Vietnamese government see tourism as an economic win-win situation both for the country as a whole and for the locals.
Certainly with the golf courses will bring in the more tourism. With the hotels that are coming up, it'll obviously bring in many jobs for the local people. I think as long as the country itself and the people keep pace with the development, then I think it will be a good thing for the country.
Tourism is often called the industry without smokestacks. Nam Hai's investors believe developments like theirs bring not only employment to local people, but can also enrich lives in other ways.
We started hiring 18 months before the resort opened. And the first thing we did is we put everybody into English language classes, that we actually ran in the sort of the shells and the first structures that were being completed at the resort. Tourism, if done the right way, I think can be one of these industries that has relatively benign impact on the environment, as opposed to the kind of impact that agribusiness, natural resource extraction and manufacturing can have as comparisons.
But not everyone's convinced that a rapidly developing tourist infrastructure brings only benefits.
A lot of tourism ends up being developed in the most beautiful and most fragile places on Earth. So when they get overwhelmed by the numbers and by the development, you ruin the very things that people are going to see. And we have to find a way to prevent that from happening.
The Vietnamese government claim they understand the problem and can deal with it. But if tourism needs anything, it needs long-term planning. And some developers inside Vietnam are sceptical about the government's ability to plan ahead.
One of the biggest concerns I have here, is really the long-term sustainability of government systems. The Vietnamese are incredibly good crisis managers. However, their problem is longer-term thinking and planning things out somewhat more systemically.
It's not just the growth of tourism that worries many, it's the kind of tourism too.
I think what we need to ask ourselves is there only one model down which mass tourism can go, or are there other ways in which you can develop a tourist sector which is less damaging to the local environment and lower carbon in terms of its intensity?
The Red Dao, a minority ethnic group in Vietnam's northern mountains near the small town of Sapa, now rely on tourists to supplement their traditional incomes. Overseas visitors here are drawn to a different type of tourism. It's lower impact and, say its supporters, more sensitive to the local environment.
We don't have swimming pool, we don't have flat screen TV, we don't have aircon. We have decided to take a lot of the luxury things away because it's very rough to maintain. It uses a lot of power and it's not good for the environment.
Topaz Lodge was built by hand and features environmental touches like solar thermal heaters and education for tourists about the needs of the local communities.
They have never done stone houses like this before because normally they make bamboo huts or bamboo houses.
This lodge is one of just a few in the whole country that caters to eco-tourists. Part of the problem, though, is that developing green tourism isn't high on the government's agenda.
At the moment, they are more concerned about economic growth and they don't think so much about environment yet. So far, many of the people in the Vietnamese government, they talk a lot, but they still have to learn about what is environment-friendly tourism. It's not a part of the education, they have to learn about it.
Some local tour operators say the fault isn't primarily that of the government, but of greedy Western travel operators who keep most of the profits from holiday sales back in their own countries.
I think a fair system is allowing that the money would be actually going to the host country, contributing to the economy, trickle down to the local communities, and that would have to probably protecting more the environment.
Developing countries particularly need to develop, they need to prosper. But I think what we've got to be able to do now, especially knowing the science of climate change, the impacts on biodiversity, the effects that we're having on planet Earth that maybe we didn't know 20, 30, 40 or more years ago. Having all of that knowledge means that we've got to try and do things in a different way to the way they were done in the past.
Vietnam and other developing nations looking to tourism to improve their people's standard of living seem caught between the proverbial rock and a hard place. Rapid development can bring in huge amounts of hard currency in the short term, but perhaps at a huge cost to the environment in the long term.
What we can't do as rich industrialised countries is to turn around and pull up the ladder and say, I'm sorry, no more development. That's simply not acceptable. People who do not have access to energy, people who are looking for development, economic development to improve their livelihoods. These are essential needs that will be fulfilled with or without fossil fuels. So what we need to see instead is support for clean, sustainable development decoupled from fossil fuel growth.
Emerging economic giants like India and China are going to continue to grow. Smaller developing nations like Vietnam and Malaysia are going to continue to seek to raise the living standards of their people, because ultimately developing nations want to attain the same living standards as those in the West, and they're becoming more and more suspicious about the developed world telling them to act responsibly.
The right approach would be for the rich countries to say that yes, we are responsible for most of what has been going on with global warming, and we accept that we should cut our emission much more than you should. And in that process, the rich countries should also transfer cleaner technology. And also, more importantly, they should invest more money in developing cleaner technologies. that the developing countries can afford.
There is a historical debt, and we shouldn't be wagging any fingers at the countries of the developing world. That, I don't think, means that we simply have a sort of hands-off approach. There has to be a constructive engagement with the countries of Asia and the rest of the developing world.
Sustainable development has been defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The big question is whether the world can agree on how best to get from here to there.